Hello and welcome back to the Meraki Cardmaker Connect virtual retreat. My name is Lynn and I hope you've been enjoying our retreat weekend so far. This morning there were 3 fantastic workshops taught to you by amazing designers. If you missed the morning session, don't worry because you can always catch it on the replay after we wrap up this afternoon's session. Thank you so much for joining us, whether you're catching this live or on the replay. This is the day 1 afternoon session, and we have another 3 amazing workshops presented by some fabulous designers. Our instructors are crafting with the exclusive retreat bundle, specially curated by Bindi herself. This was such a popular bundle, it sold out twice. However, if you didn't get a kit, feel free to craft along with what you have in your stash. If you prefer, you can also just sit back, watch these workshops, and chat along with our amazing community. This virtual retreat will be available on replay here on the Crafting Meraki YouTube channel, so you can always come back later and watch it time and time again, anytime you wish. Before we get started though, I hope you'll do me that favor of liking this video and sharing it out to your socials. That way, even more crafters can join in on the fun. Our instructors are also in the live chat, so if you're watching us live, please do say hello and let us know where you're watching from. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask in the live chat, or if you're watching this on the replay, drop us a comment below. Our instructors will do their very best to answer you. If you've been inspired by what you've seen here today, I hope you'll share your makes with us on Facebook. The Meraki Crafty Corner is a fun, welcoming community where you can share your projects and show us what you've made. Don't forget also, we have even more workshops coming up tomorrow, so after today, don't forget to come back tomorrow afternoon and catch the final 4 workshops. Now, let's get started.
Hello, I'm Amanda Stevens of Pear Blossom Press. Welcome to my craft room. I hope you're having a great time at the Crafting Meraki retreat so far, making some beautiful cards and making some fun new friends in the chat. If you have any questions as we go along, I will be in the chat, so drop your questions there and I'm happy to answer them as this is a pre-recorded video. So if you're ready, it's time to make a light-up card. Let's go. First, let's take a look at the card we're making. Tell me this isn't one of the prettiest birthday cards. Wouldn't you love to get this? I think it's just really awesome. And the lights really elevate it, and I even decorated the inside. Okay, so earlier in the week I assigned homework. If you didn't get a chance to do it, you're going to want to do that now while we're ink blending. The first thing you're going to do is make an A2 card base from the lightest pink cardstock you have. Then you're going to need an A2 card front and then a slightly smaller panel, 4 inches by 5 1/4, again from that same light pink cardstock. And then when we layer them up together, we get like an 1/8 inch border and a nice sturdy card. Okay, let me show you the dies that we're cutting from. Again, if you're crafting and shopping your stash, just pull out something similar. But in the Crafting Meraki retreat, we've got the Celebrate die set that's in that kit. You're going to cut the shadow once from white vellum, Then the letters to spell out celebrate, I cut them 3 times, twice from white cardstock and once from gold, and I asked you to layer those up beforehand so that you've got the word celebrate ready to go, and it'll be a nice thick sentiment. Now in the Build Your Cake die set, we've got the cake stand, cut 3 times, once from gold, twice from white, just like the letters. So we'll stack those up. Then we need our cake layers and the frosting. You want 3 layers of white cardstock for each cake piece, and then 1 layer of pink icing for the tops. And you do the same thing for the smaller tier of the cake. All right, the small candles in that set, we're going to cut them out 3 times. You want 3 gold ones, then you need 3 white cardstock ones, and then you're going to need 3 yellow vellum candles as well, the short ones. If you don't have yellow vellum, just cut it from the same white that you cut the shadow layer from and color them with a marker. Okay, again, make sure that you are using the short ones so that it fits on an A2 panel better. And then we need the flowers and strawberries. So I've gone ahead and I cut 8 white flowers. And if the centers fall out, it's not a big deal because we're going to cover those up anyhow, so don't worry about those. You're going to need 10 pink strawberries. And you can use the same pink that you cut the icing and your card base from. We'll ink blend those. And then we need some leaves and the strawberry stems. And in that die set, the die actually cuts 2 different size leaves and a stem at the same time. And I used a light green cardstock so that I cut it 10 times. I got 10 stems, and that gave me 20 leaves. And if you've done your homework, you've got all that ready. From your stash, see if you've got a stamp that has a push and a pull, and pull those out. We're going to use those for our easy light. You're going to want to indicate where the push button is, and then we're going to stick a tab underneath the battery so that the battery doesn't drain. Cut the tab to be 1/2 inch wide and about 3 inches long. And if you don't have that stamp set, don't worry, you can just write it with a pen. So let me get that out of the way, and then we'll start ink blending. I've got that smaller panel, that 4 by 5 1/4. I've got 1 tier of the small, or I'm sorry, 1 layer of the small tier cake and the icing, and then 1 of the large cake pieces and its icing. So we're just going to ink those up. And then I also want to grab the strawberries. And I'll lay those all out here. We're going to do all of our pink blending first. And I'm just setting this on my waffle flower mat. You can use just spare paper or whatever you ink blend on. And I've got 2 shades of pink. These happen to be from Concord and Ninth. It's Ballet Slipper and Honeysuckle. And then I'm going to grab a nice soft brush. And I also need to have a cloth nearby. You can use a paper towel or whatever you want. I've got a microfiber cloth here, and I'm going to make sure that I've got it. This brush, I'm going to unload as much as possible. You can see there's a lot of pink still on my brush. So I'm testing on a strawberry. The strawberries I know are going to be my darkest, so I'm not too worried about it. And then I'm just going to keep cleaning until the strawberries come out pretty clean. One might test with them. And that seems good. So I'm going to load up a little bit of the light pink ink, and then I want to test on one more strawberry, make sure it's not re-wetting that dark pink, and it looks good. So I'm just going to put a little bit on the bottom of each of the cake tiers, just barely, a whisper of pink. All we want to do is make it not stark white. And let's see, let me grab another layer here and I'll show you what it looks like. See that it's just a hint of pink. Okay, so now let's get a little bit deeper with color here on those icing layers. Because they already have a base coat of pink, they're cut from pink paper, we can step it up a notch, and it doesn't take that long at all. I'm just using some of the ink that's on that brush, and I'm gonna add a little bit of that honeysuckle now, I think. And I'll dab off onto my pad. And again, I'm testing on a strawberry, make sure I don't get too dark, because you can't go backwards. So always test on whatever is going to end up being the darkest. And I'm just going to add a little bit more to the bottom and the sides, and I'll hold it up against my pink panel, and you can see there's definitely a difference there, and I'm happy with those. And now also in that kind of a medium shade of pink, we're going to do the background, and we're going to create sort of a vignette. So what you want to do is ink up your 4 corners and then basically connect them with like an oval pattern. So you'll see me just add more ink in the corners first, and then I'll start connecting them. And you can build this up as much or as little as you want. I'm looking for a medium shade because I want the strawberries to be the boldest pink. And this takes a little bit of time. But I really like the variation of color that you get when you do this. I'll add a little bit more. If you're having problems getting your ink to blend, you may need to add more ink. And while I'm saying go for a medium shade here, if you're getting brush marks, you may need to just get heavier handed with it and blend them in. That's usually the only way to fix it, is to just go bolder. But if you've got a nice blend when you build up the color, it'll look something like this. You could even probably go a little bolder, but we're gonna try to move faster so that we stay on time here. Now I'll just grab the darkest, that honeysuckle ink here. I don't need to worry about the light ink on these strawberries at all. And I want to get a good first coat on here. And I guess we could have cut these from a darker cardstock, but I wanted to have a little bit of that lightness showing. It comes through. And now I'm just going to kind of edge a little bit and darken up one side of the strawberries. I'm not worried about a light source per se. I'm just kind of picking one side of the strawberry to sort of darken up. And I want to make sure they're nice and bright and bold. You could always do this with markers if you prefer, instead of ink blending. I do both. I like both. But for this one I thought ink blending would be faster. Alright, let's grab that panel and see if they're bright enough. I think not quite. I want to add a little bit more color to these. So let's just lean into these a little bit more here. And get them nice and bright. Okay, now let's take a look. That looks much better. Okay, we'll clean this up, and I'll get these strawberries out of the way. Then I can, let's see, clean the mat here. And I'm just using water in that same microfiber cloth. This mat stains. It's a silicone mat. It's nice because it holds your pieces, but it definitely stains, which it doesn't bother me. If it bothered you, this might not be the right tool, but I really like it to ink blend on and even to color on because it holds little pieces in place. All right, let's go ahead and grab those white flowers. Make sure you don't have ink on your fingers. Mine were okay. I'm going to set out these little flowers, and then I'm going to grab 2 shades of yellow ink. So, and I grabbed a Q-tip also because my smallest brushes they're just too big. And I believe, let's see, that's Buttercup and Stardust, I think. So I'm going to start with the lightest, and I'm just going for it in the middle, maybe about halfway out to the edges of the flower, but I want to leave a lot of white space. And it's just once over. Yellow's easy, it's light and bright. And then I like that, so let's go ahead and add the darker right in the middle. You want to make sure the darker area is big enough so that you'll still see it when you glue your gems on top, or if you're using the sequins from the kit. Whatever you're going to top your flowers with, make sure that the circumference of your dark area is a little bit bigger, otherwise you won't see it. So I'm just going basically the head of the Q-tip size, because that's slightly bigger than my gems, and just darkening up the center of the flowers. And there we go. I like the way that looks. Take a look. Looks like a strawberry flower to me. Let's get these out of the way. And then we have a little more ink blending to do. We need to get our green leaves and stems. So I'll go ahead and set these out. I don't need to clean my mat because it's just yellow ink on there, so not a problem. And then I'm just gonna make sure they're all right side up. I use a Pro Deck when I die cut most of my pieces, and it's really cool because it gives me great cuts. The deck never warps, and it really gives me deep embossing with my dies. So there's definitely a right and wrong side of my die cuts when I use that. So I'm making sure that they are all right side up. And then I've got, this is parsley ink, which is a medium green. It's darker than my paper. And I'll bring in, this is the smallest regular blending brush that I have. It's called a Bitty Blender, and it's perfect for these guys. And I'm just going to try to add ink mostly to like the bottom of the leaves, so that it kind of leads up into the light green color of the paper itself. And some of them I'll be heavier handed and some of them I'll be lighter. We're just trying to get some variation of color. It gives them texture, gives them life. And for those of you that are die cutting so that you can catch up, if you're cutting from just solid colored cardstock, that's fine too. It won't have as much variation. You could always pause it and then catch up, or watch the replay to do the rest. But you can certainly put this together with just colored cardstock because they are really pretty dies on their own. But I really like the punch that this adds when we deepen them up with some extra color. All right, let's do these stems. And this, I'm just kind of hitting them, trying to leave like one of the leaves or the stem exposed so that I have like color on 3/4 of it or more. It doesn't really matter. We just want to add some color and texture to it. And some I'm going heavier handed than others. All right, I like these. So now before I put these away, let's grab the strawberries back and set them out, because now is just as good a time as any to assemble them. I'm gonna stick the strawberries right side up here, and that way I can glue on the stems while they're here. You can use tweezers or a jewel picker. I like the tweezers for the most part, and I am pulling out my PVA glue that's in a fine line bottle. This is my go-to for paper to paper gluing. It dries quickly. And there's our first strawberry assembled. When you're putting the strawberries together, make sure that you have like the 3 bigger leaves actually at the top of the strawberry, you know, touching the top of the strawberry, and the stem itself will extend beyond the top. If you look at the strawberry like it's a heart, the 3 leaves will be in the top of the heart, and then the stem sticks out of the top. But this part goes really fast, and they're sticking to my finger, so I'll just put them in the cup from there. All right. Who designed this with so many pieces? I don't know. It makes a really pretty background though. All right. Halfway there, halfway there. Couple more strawberries to get the stems on here. And they sure do look pretty. These would be fun for all kinds of cards. Nice and summery. All right, last strawberry. And then let's get these green leaves off the mat here. I'm going to use my pickup stick and just grab them and stick them in there. That way I'm not sticking my finger all in the ink. And having these little cups around are handy too. I call them die cut jail. All right, let's get this out of the way. I'll clean this up later. And next we're going to grab our Misty. We want to do the little bit of stamping that there is for this card. So grab one of the, the ink blended layer of your big cake, the big cake layer. Bleh. And let's glue the icing on top. This way we can line up the push stamp underneath and we know it's not going to be covered up by the icing. So just glue that on top there. And then you can see we're going to stamp it on the left side. And if you don't have a push stamp in your collection, then just go ahead and write it with a pen. I have a push and a pull in this stamp set here. And this, in my Misty, I have a sticky mat. So I'm going to go ahead and pull the cover off of the sticky piece and hold the cake layer in place because it's not a perfect square. The bottom is curved, so the sticky mat will hold it in place. And then I'm also going to line up that pull tab at the same time. I'll grab the little word that's push that's kind of in cursive here. This one has a couple different options. And then I also want the word pull. You could also use the word remove, although this tab is a little bit narrow. You'd want something a little wider for remove. And then the push stamp I'm going to line up. You do not have to be exact. You're just going to want it somewhere on the left side, not too close to the bottom and not too close to the left edge. Give yourself, I don't know, at least an 1/8 inch in from both sides. And then when you line up these small stamps, sometimes they have a tendency to kind of stick to your finger, so they take a little bit of messing with to get them right. And then I'm going to grab that pink, that dark pink honeysuckle ink, and I'm going to lightly stamp the stamps or ink up the stamps. And it's much better to give just feather pressure for this and stamp it 2 or 3 times if you need to, rather than smushing down on the words. If you push really hard, the letters will smush together and then it's hard to read. So I'm just barely pressing down with my fingers, just the lightest little rub. And pull looks good. That only needed 2 times stamping, but I want to ink up the push one more time here. It's a little light, so one more try. Okay, I like that now. What do you think? You can read it, but it sort of blends in, which is nice. It's not going to take away from the card. All right, I will put this away and clean all this up later. Now let's bring in that ink blended card front there, and then let's start building our background. So I'll lay out the strawberries and the leaves. just set them out on my desk. I've actually made this card like 3 or 4 times. I made it originally to figure out the design. And let's make sure we reserve a couple strawberries for the cake itself and for the inside of the card. But I've made this card enough times now that it's just, I hope I'm not going too fast for you, because I've kind of got it down now. I'm also going to set aside 8 leaves for the cake decorations and for the inside of the card. So I'm putting those in a little dish there, and then I'm going to grab my flowers. Let's see, we need to save 2 flowers, one for the inside and one for the cake. So I'll set those aside now too. And for the one inside the card, if you have a flower that still has its center in place, save that one. That one would be good. It's not a big deal if you don't, but if you do, that'll be good, because we're not going to put a gem on the inside. All right, I'm going to use my original card as kind of the just the guide, the placement guide, because I've already built this background before. You can spend as much time, you know, messing around with it, picking the layout that you like. I'm not trying to make any type of grid or anything like that. I just want it to feel sort of random. I want to make sure that I have leaves and berries and flowers going off of all 4 sides. The middle of the background is going to be covered by that cake, so I'm not concerned about getting anything, you know, really dense in the middle. I want to focus on the outer edges. And I usually like to build it up with the big pieces first. So strawberries and flowers first, and then the leaves are smaller, so I'll fill in with those guys. And my friend Nancy, she calls this auditioning. Audition the pieces where you want them to go. And once you're happy with it, then you can start gluing them down. And that's what I'm doing here. And notice how I'm making sure some pieces go off the edges on all 4 sides. That really helps your panel feel like it's part of a bigger piece. And I'm just going to hold up the cake stand here, make sure I'm not covering up something important. And I'm not really. I think that's good. So let's go ahead and start gluing. You can use either your pickup stick or your tweezers. The bigger pieces are usually easier with the tweezers. And then I'm just using more of that PVA glue here. And just kind of going along, gluing them all down. It's probably easier if you go, you know, in rows across so that you make sure you get them all. Or you can start with the flowers, then go to the strawberries, then go to the leaves, whatever you'd like to do. You hear the boss. The reason I use the PVA glue in the fine line bottle, it gives me a thin enough stream that it dries very fast and I don't ever get any warping from it. And I stopped using the tape runners because I used to go teach in person and I would take card samples to class long before Pinterest. And so I'd bring a basket or 2 of samples so students could, you know, see and get ideas for other cards. And all of the ones that I had put together with my tape runners over time just started falling apart. So I went back to wet glue just because I know I can trust it. And it gives me that wiggle time. I have heard that today's tape runners don't give up like the old ones did. So, you know, whatever you prefer is fine. For small pieces like this, and I am often die cutting and assembling small pieces, the wet glue is just easier. Might be a little more time consuming though. And every once in a while you get glue boogers on your fingers. It's just a hazard of the job. All right, so this part is, seems to take the longest. Ink blending takes time, and then gluing it all down takes time, but not too bad. And in the end, we're going to have a really stunning card, so it's totally worth it. Do you have anybody in mind that you would give this card to? Don't say you'd hoard it and keep it forever. You have to share it. Although if you really, really love a card, give it to somebody who lives in the house with you so you can get it back. That's what I do. My husband gets some strange cards that he would probably never get just because I don't want to give them up. This card is for sure going to somebody though, because I've made this card like I said 3 or 4 times already, plus a couple variations of it. And I'll show you the variations at the end too. Okay, is that all of them? Nope, not quite. Let's see. Couple more leaves. Now, oh, nope. 2 more. You can always tell which ones you forgot to glue down because they fall off. All right, last one here. And now I'm going to grab my trimmer so we can cut off the extra pieces. And I'll slide it under, and then I'm just going to line up the pink edges with my fingers on the edge so I know that it's straight, and I can give myself one good straight edge. Now I can line it up at the top with a guide, and then I can trim off the excess from the other sides. You could always do this with scissors too. All right. Now if there's any bare spots, you can come back in and fill in with some of the leaves and flower bits that you've cut off. In fact, I've got one little white flower petal part. It's just a tiny bit, but I want something else in this corner here. So I'm going to glue this on, and I'll make sure that it's flush to the edge so I don't have to trim again. There we go. And I think that's good. So let's go ahead and clean this up. And then we can bring in our card front and our card base and start gluing these 3 layers together. So I'll glue this panel onto the card front. And this, because it's a 1/4 inch smaller, we'll have an 1/8 inch border all the way around. That gives us plenty of room for our cake, but it still gives us a nice border. And you could, if your pink cardstock is nice and stiff, you could go straight to your card base. This is fairly heavy cardstock, but it has a little flop to it. So I wanted 1 extra panel in between, and that's going to give me a really nice, firm, sturdy card front so that my cake has something sturdy to rest against. And I'll just glue this onto my card base. And again, that fine line bottle keeps the flow low enough, the flow rate low enough that I don't have to worry about warping, which is nice. And I'll just smooth it out, make sure it's stuck nice and good. All right, look at that. That is very pretty, right? You could just slap a sentiment on it and call it done. But we're not done yet. But wait, there's more. All right, let's work on the cake. So I'll set my easy light aside. I've got the top tier, the second tier of the cake, and then I've got the cake stand. All those layers, we're going to glue each layer up separately. So I'll glue my cake stand together, the gold on top, And then for mirror paper, well, for anything ink blended, anything where I might transfer a glue booger from my finger to the piece, I'll flip it over and then I can really rub without worrying about ink from my finger or glue boogers transferring. At least not to the pretty side. I'll get these 3 layers all stuck together and get a nice sturdy cake stand here. And I did smear a little glue on there, but it's still wet, so I can rub it off. Okay, now our large cake, we have 2 more layers of white to glue onto the back. And if you don't, if you don't want it this thick, you don't necessarily have to, or you could always use watercolor paper, like 1 layer of a heavy watercolor paper instead of the 2 white pieces. That should give you a nice thick piece as well. But I want something nice and heavy. Okay, so I'm grabbing my Barely Arts glue because I want to glue the bottom layer of the cake to the gold mirror paper, but PVA glue will not stick to that mirror paper very well. It'll stick at first, but it won't hold up over time. So I'm using the Barely Arts glue. It is going to take longer to dry, so that's why I'm gluing it now. I want to get it set on there. You definitely have wiggle room, but you're going to have a lot of wiggle room. So give it some time to dry and don't mess with it. I'll let it sit there for a second while I glue the 3 layers of the top tier together. And these are the first 2 white layers, and then the ink blended layer will go on top. There we go. All right, let's add the icing to the top tier. Looks good. Now we can glue this to the larger cake, and I can just use the PVA glue there again because it's paper to paper, regular paper. And I'll stick that down, but I want to be careful not to wiggle. The gold is still wet. And you see how it's nice and thick now? And you see I wiggled it a little bit. So we're gonna let that dry some more. All right, now let's work on the candles. The candles are gonna have the lights, and I'm bringing in my pull tab so I don't forget it. Sometimes I forget to put the pull tab in. You have 3 layers for each candle: the gold, the white cardstock, and then the yellow vellum. And you can see on the sample here, the yellow vellum is underneath the gold. Lights won't shine through gold mirror paper, so we're gonna cut the tops off and then layer them onto the vellum. Now, if you've never seen an Easy Light, that's what this is. If you got the retreat kit, you've got one in there. It has a little tab under the battery. When you pull that out, you'll be able to push the gold button at the bottom and the 3 lights will light up. I want you to take a close look. Well, let me show you. The push is going to go under that button, and then the lights are going to thread up onto the candles. I'll show you the LED part in just a second. So let's go ahead and assemble these. Start by snipping off the flame from the top of the gold. And there is a tiny little wick. I'm leaving the wick in place. Let's see if I can hold it up here and you can see. Kind of. So there's a tiny little bump sticking up. That's our wick. Now let's glue these onto our yellow vellum candles. And I'm definitely going to use tweezers here because it'll get my fingers out of the way. And I'm gluing them right on top so that just the flame is exposed. Just the yellow vellum flame is exposed. What we're doing is we're creating the outsides of the sandwich for the lights. The lights that are on the wires are going to go in between the gold and the white candles. And the light's going to show through the vellum. All right, let's try that again. Let's zoom in here a little bit so you can see. We've got the yellow at the top of the gold candle. All right, now grab your double stick tape. If you have 1/8 inch double stick tape, this is perfect. If you have anything wider, you're going to want to trim it down. You want it to be an 1/8 inch thick because we are going to use it on the back sides of these candles to sandwich everything together. It's just going to make your life easier to use double stick tape. This is a Rip and Stick from Trinity Stamps. It's nice because you can actually just rip it. I'm going to hold my fingernail there and it just pulls right off. And I'm putting it on the back side of each of those gold candles. So on the back of the yellow vellum. And do not worry about getting it up on the flame. All you need is the candle stick. Let's keep this as easy as possible. And now we're going to put some on the white candlesticks as well. And these are actually facing up. If you have a right and wrong side of your die, you want them facing up. Although you're not really going to see, and they're basically mirror, so it's not a big deal if you have one upside down. All right, all three have the adhesive now. Okay, let's go ahead and stick the gold candles to the top of our cake. I'm going to peel off the release paper. This way we're going to get our candles exactly where we want them to be on the cake. I'll use my tweezers on the top on that flame because there's no adhesive up there. And then I'm just going to put the first one in the center. When I press down, I'm being careful not to stick the candle to my table. I'm just sticking it to the cake. Okay? But it's a pretty thick cake there. You've got several layers of cardstock, so it's not touching the table. So as long as you don't purposely push it into the table, it'll be fine. And then put his neighbors in place. I think they're maybe 1/8 of an inch apart. Just space them however you'd like on the top of your cake. And then make sure they're straight and you're happy with them. Now I'm going to flip it over just for safekeeping because that adhesive is exposed on the back there. And then I'm going to pull off the adhesive on one of my white candles. And let me show you, this is what I started to tell you about earlier. On your Easy Light, each one has 3 LEDs on wires, and there is a yellow dot at the top. That's the LED. You want the yellow dot facing out. It's the brightest. If you flip it over, you'll see the wires on the back, and it's not as bright. It still glows, but it doesn't glow as bright. So get the yellow dot facing up on that white candle, up in the flame, and then pull those wires down across the adhesive. They'll stick there. If it twists a little, no worries, you can just twist it back. Make sure that that yellow dot is facing forward on your white candle. All right, so that it glows nice and bright. Now we'll do the same thing with the next 2 candles. So again, just peel off the release paper. There's no adhesive at the very top. That's just fiddly and hard. So I'm going to line up the LED where I want it. I'll pull the wires straight down across the candle. And if the yellow head spins a little bit, I'll spin it back. I'll make sure that it's in the right place, facing forward. And repeat for the 3rd candle as well. If you had a situation where you just wanted 2 candles or 1 candle, you could absolutely cut one of these lights off. Don't be afraid of that. Or you could gather all 3 together and make one brighter candle. That's an option too. Okay, so I've got those 3. And now they're ready to sandwich onto the cake. But I'm going to grab a piece of Scotch tape and have this in my fingers because those wires, they're not super stiff, but they're a little stiff. They have a bit of a mind of their own. And so once I get these sandwiched down, I want to make sure that they're not going to twist and move around on me. So, and see that little yellow guy, he decided to roll sideways. So I rolled him forward again. Now I'm going to smush him right on top of that gold candle. Remember, there's adhesive on either side of the wires and on the gold. So everything is just going to sandwich together nicely. And we'll do the same thing for the next 2 candles. And I know this looks a little bit finicky, but it's really not that hard. You can see what I'm doing. And then I'm just going to tape those wires down. And that way, when we do the next part, when we start putting the button in place and everything, it's not gonna grab the gold candles and try to move them sideways or anything. Okay, so test it, make sure it lights up, everything's good. You can see the gold button. That's gonna need to line up behind the cake underneath the word push. But you see we have all this extra wire. Let's go ahead and coil it around our finger a few times here, just to sort of train that wire to get out of the way and not be quite so messy. And then we're going to add some more of that double stick tape right on top of the silver battery clip. You can absolutely do this. This is way easier. I do this all the time. Because this is that 1/8 inch double stick tape, I'm going to use 2 pieces here, just so I have a little more area that's actually sticking. And also I have a lot of variation of height because of the 3 layers of cardstock, so I want to give myself enough room to actually grab hold of the cake with the double stick tape. And then now I'm going to hold this up and I'm going to line it up so that the button is right behind the word push, and then I can't see any of the easy lights sticking out from the back. All right, and I'm giving it a test to make sure it's in the right spot. I caught some of my coil, so I'm going to pull it out from underneath that double stick tape. But the button is in the right spot. Let me move this coil just a little bit. It's probably not that big of a deal, but I don't want this to be any thicker than it needs to be. And then I'll grab another little piece of Scotch tape and just hold those wires in place. We wouldn't want them to start peeking out from the side for any reason. And then I've got a little extra tape. I'm going to cut the tape, not the wires. If you cut the wires, your light doesn't work. So just be aware of that. All right, I'll trim off my tape there. And now we've got a light up cake. Ta-da! Not super complicated, right? All right, remember that pull tab? Now is the time to put it in place. So I'm going to take my tweezers and I'm going to slide the battery out from underneath. And in this orientation, we're going to push from the left to the right. It's not going to come out the other way, and the battery has to go back in the same direction that it came out. Take your pull tab, flip it upside down, because you want to be able to read pull from the other side. And then I'm going to turn it over, get it lined up to the right spot, and I'll trim off the excess. Again, be careful not to cut any wires. And now, holding that pull tab in place, I'm going to take the battery, and this is the back side. See the front? You can see words. You don't want to be able to read words. You're going to slide it in upside down because the whole light is upside down. Okay? And you can use your tweezers to push it back in. And now give it a test. Push the button, no lights come on. Ta-da! It can go through the mail. Okay, so it's basically ready to adhere to our card. We want to add some double thick foam tape. If you do not have double thick foam tape, you're going to need to use 2 layers of regular foam tape because you need to get the cake the same height as the battery. So this is the world's best foam tape. We call it that because it's repositionable for 30 minutes. And then it'll become permanent overnight for you. And also the release paper actually releases, which I think is pretty fabulous. And it's already double thick, which is perfect for lights and shaker cards. So now I'm going to put some around the light, and that pull tab that's there, I'm avoiding it right now. I am going to stick a piece underneath it though. And when I pull off all the release paper, I'll be sure not to pull off the release paper underneath that pull tab because we wouldn't want it to get stuck. If you pulled the release paper off, then your pull tab would not be able to pull out. So be aware of that. Okay, let's add a couple more pieces on the candles just so that they have a little bit of support too. I didn't do this on the original one. It's not that big a deal, but I've been playing with it a lot and I've started to notice they're a little saggy. I think they might sag in the mail if I actually mailed them. So I'm going to go ahead and add a little bit of support under the candles. And I'm not worrying about the flames because it's such a small area that as long as the candlesticks have support, they're good. Okay, that looks good. I'll peel off the release paper. Look how fast it comes off. Easy peasy. It's in the name. It should just work, right? And again, don't pull off the release paper underneath the pull tab. If you do that, your pull tab won't pull out. Okay? Now I'm going to use my tweezers to place this so my fingers aren't in the way and I can actually see and line it up. And we'll stick it down. And I like that. We're good to go there. Pushing on the button, it doesn't work. Now let's put the sentiment on. So remember, we've already assembled the words celebrate. They're stacked. Each letter is stacked 3 high, 2 layers of white, 1 layer of gold. If you don't like stacked sentiments, you don't have to do that. I just think it really makes them pop. And I'm going to glue them onto that vellum shadow layer there. If I have any excess glue, I tend to dip it off on my hand, which also makes for glue boogers. What can you do? All right, and I am putting the key letters in place first. The C, the T, the L, the B, because those stick up above and below. So I want to make sure that those are lined up correctly. That way, when we put in the letters in between where there's less differential, it's easier to eyeball those and make sure they're right. But these ones, the taller letters, get those in place first because they'll conform to their outline easier. All right. Now for the vowels. Make sure you spell it right. And we are so close to done. All right. Doesn't that look pretty? And it really has nice depth, so it'll pop off. Now we do need to elevate the sides because it's going to go across the bottom of the cake stand. So on the 3 letters on either side, I want to get some foam tape behind them. And I'm just using that same double thick foam tape and I'm cutting narrow little strips. And it's kind of nice because as I cut these really narrow strips, the release paper is coming off on its own. And for like the C, when I cut the strip for the C, I'm going to make sure that I take the release paper off if it doesn't come off on its own, because that way we can curve it around the letter. If you leave the paper on, it's hard to curve. So see, just follows the shape of the C, no problem. And then I'm going to cut one more strip for the little letters. I'm just going to cut this down into thirds. I don't need the whole letter to be covered. I just need a little bit of support underneath it. And because we're using vellum, we have to kind of cut the small pieces. If we had used a solid piece of cardstock, then you could just put a big piece on either side. Tried the tweezers. The tweezers, it kind of wants to stick to the tweezers because the tweezer smashes the foam together. So sometimes it's just easier to use your fingers. All right, now I'll go ahead and stick this in place. Whoops, good thing that is repositionable foam tape. All right, we'll go ahead and stick this down. And look at that, very pretty, right? Now I need my Barely Arts glue for the gems. And I'm using, these are the Magic Iris. These are like a crystal clear gems. And these are really nice. They feel like they're glass. I think they might be glass or crystal. Sometimes it's easier to have them spread out on like a single layer on a tray. So I'll just kind of pour some out. Oh, I forgot. We need to actually put the decorations on the cake, right? And our inside. Let's do that first before we glue the gems on. So I've got 2 flowers saved, 3 strawberries, and I think I had 8 leaves. So I'm going to kind of make a couple little clusters, one for the inside, one for the bottom layer of the cake, and one for the top tier, or between the top and middle, or top and bottom tier. You could put them near the candles if you want, but there's not a lot of real estate. You'd kind of lose the candles. Maybe if you made a taller card, then you could use the taller candles and put a strawberry up there. All right, I'm just gonna put 2 or 3 leaves with each cluster, and then I will lay them out here. Make sure that I like them. I think I need to spin those leaves a little bit. Yeah, like that. We'll glue these guys in place. Got ahead of myself. I thought we were done. Can't not decorate the cake though. All right, let me move that down a little bit. Then we're going to add the other leaf. Now I can glue this strawberry on top. Make sure he doesn't look like he's hanging off the side. We want him so that he looks like he's on top of the bottom tier. All right, now we're going to put a flower and a strawberry here with some more leaves. And I'll put 2 leaves on the left and then tuck in a 3rd leaf kind of between the strawberry and the flower. That looks nice. And I'll go ahead and start gluing the leaves first here as well. We really are on the home stretch, guys. I know this is a lot of gluing, but what a beautiful card, right? How special is this? All right. And then let's get this strawberry on the cake. Again, make sure it's not hanging below the gold rim because you want it to look like it's still on the plate. There we go. And then inside, let's see here. I'm going to add this little dish to hold it down because the top is so heavy. It wants to draw the back up. Now we'll glue the flower and the strawberry down. Let me tuck my little leaves in there real quick. And this way you have something pretty on the inside of the card too. I don't usually decorate the insides, but the first time I made this card, I didn't know how many flowers and strawberries I was going to need, and I ended up with a few extra, so I tucked them inside, and I thought it was really pretty, so I made sure to do that on this one too. Okay, now gems, and then we're done. All right, so I'm grabbing my Barely Art glue again. PVA won't hold the mirror paper, and it won't hold gems. You need something stronger like Barely Arts. And I'm going to put a dot of glue and a gem in the center of each flower that we can see. If it's underneath, then don't worry about it because you wouldn't see the gem. And using a little jewel picker like this is really handy. The wax tip picks it up and you're able to set it back down. Sometimes I need a little pin to help move it around if it shifts on me. There we go. And then I want a few more to just fill out the background. So kind of like dewdrops, except sparkly dewdrops. And don't overthink this. Don't put too much effort into it. I do try to put like one really big and one tiny one next to each other here and there. And then I try not to put the same size gems next to each other, unless that's all I have. Then whatever. But in this case, there's quite a few different sizes here, so I'm just using different ones. And I'll give myself some different glue dots. And then just add gems. I say don't overthink it, but I probably do overthink it. Try not to overthink it. How's that? All right, I think, let's see, one more and then we're done. Yep, there we go. Isn't that pretty? Okay, now you can send it in the mail just like this. It should not be over an ounce, so you should be able to send it with just one stamp, but you might want two just in case you've gone crazy with the cardstock. When your recipient gets it, they pull it out, and then the push button works. Isn't that fun? Okay, now before I go, I do want to show you a couple alternatives. So I made the strawberry card, that we just made together. And then at the same time, I also made a cherry card, which is also very pretty. I just swapped out the cherries for the strawberries. That's in the same die set. And I changed the pink to like a salmon color. I think that card's really pretty too. And then for my third card, I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do. I knew I wanted to use those flowers, but the small leaves seemed a little too small. And I saw a card by Tina Smith and it really inspired me. So I grabbed the canopy leaf set from my stash and I used that for the background. I think it's really pretty. And then instead of the gold for Celebrate, I used some of the ombre glitter paper that's in the retreat kit. That stuff is awesome. It doesn't shed and it's super smooth. All right, enjoy the rest of the retreat. Bye-bye.
Hi guys, I am Kelly Taylor and I am super excited to be teaching you this portion of the Cardmaker Connect class. We are going to be using the Festive Delight Cake Layering die set, the Be Your Own Kind of Cupcake, the EAP for our sentiment, the birthday Effortless shimmer paper, and then the gems as well. Now, with your homework, we should have already die cut out the majority of our die cuts. So we're going to start right in with coloring them. I'm just going to briefly go over what you should have. 4 strawberries and 4 tops, 3 cherries and 3 stems, 4 flowers, 9 leaves. I did both sides of the leaves, so you just do whichever size is or mix and match them. We're going to die cut both of the cakes with their matching frostings. And then the only thing that will be cut in gold is the one cake stand. Everything else will be cut in white because we are going to be coloring them with our alcohol markers. You can use whatever, you have on hand to do the coloring. If you would prefer watercolor, you would cut them out of watercolor paper. If you prefer colored pencils, that's fine. Whatever works for you. So starting with the cake layers, because I want my cake to be white, I am going in with some warm grays to add in some shadows so that our cake still has dimension and it doesn't look flat. It looks like it's more realistic. So I start with my darkest color. I do a ring kind of around the top. You'll notice when these are die cut, there is a cut edge there. So I just went right above that cut edge and then along the sides as well, just added a little bit of darkness, and I will go right over that with my mid-tone, which is a W3. And also, basically I'm just flicking in from the sides. White is our 4th color here, and that's the white of the paper. So we want to make sure we're not flicking too far in so that we aren't losing that white color, which is going to be our highlight. For the W1, I'm going over everything that we have just done, and then again, just flicking it out slightly. I know that they look gray right now, but that's okay. Just hang tight because once we put everything together, it really will look white. But right now, we don't have anything to compare it to. There's no other colors to take away from that gray. We're going to then lay our frosting on top of our cakes and just kind of hold them in place with our finger. And to do what we are doing here is basically just figuring out where the shadow is going to go so that the frosting and the cake look like they go together, like they are one piece instead of two. So I'm going to take my lightest color because I don't want to necessarily have it bleed into my frosting. So I'm going to take my lightest color and I'm just going to go around the edge. Now I chose to do my shadows kind of like to the left-hand side. So that's what I'm marking, but you could go over the whole thing if you wanted it to be a much darker shadow. And you could also flip-flop these, like this is just to teach you the technique. You could go in and do these, after we build this card, you could do it again with, maybe strawberry frosting, and then you would use reds on a chocolate cake. This is just to teach you the general technique of how you would add the dimension. So that way you can reproduce this on your other cards. So here I'm just double checking that it is how I want it to be. And then I'm going to move on to the top layer and I'm going to do exactly the same thing. I am going to hold it in place there with my finger, and then I will go in. I think I went in with the W3, which is the darkest shadow color for this, and then blended that out with my W1. But again, this is just creating that shadow on the white portion of the cake. And I know that it's hard to see how this is all going to come together, but truly just kind of trust the process because that gray will not look gray once it is all put together. So with that said, that's going to be it for the cake bottoms, and we are going to move on to the cake tops. Now for the cake tops, I did choose to use some browns so that it would be chocolate, but we're going to follow a lot of the same rules that we just did with the cake. So we're going to create that darker line right above the cut line and those same little kind of V shapes on the edges so that it gives the appearance of dimension. So we're going to go around through that, create those little V's. Now, I always try to be a little light-handed with my dark colors when I first go in because it's much easier to add more dark than it is to take it away. So first, when I'm going in here, the side that I have my shadow on, remember I told you with the cakes, I did the shadow down and to the left. So that's where I'm putting my darkest color on the frosting that's kind of dripping down. And then I'm just adding just a little flick of color on the right. I'm leaving a white barrier between the edge and my coloring because this is going to be filled in by my mid-tone. So just to make sure that everything blends really nicely together, I am going to put in just a little bit more dark along the top, but I am leaving a white edge right underneath that cut line, and I'm also not connecting them. I'm leaving just a little bit of a highlight there in the middle, and then I will go in with my mid-tone, go right over the things that we've just done, so that the lightest part of my cake is in the center, a very thin line around the back. Here with this color, I will go ahead and connect that previous line that was under the cut line. And I'm going to do a lot of filling in of the drips. So I am using this mid-tone to connect them. You'll see like right there, that little line of color that we did with the darkest. I am connecting it then to the next drip with this color. So just going up above that arch and then just connecting it down. This is the point where I'm getting a really good idea of how much light area I want to have. And then the lightest color will just fill in everything else, including that line. That's our highlight line to show the two different edges. So like one is the top of the cake and one is the drips down. We want to highlight to be right on that edge. And then anything that's left over, that right hand edge and then the center of the drips, I'm going to fill in with my lightest color. And then from here, I'm going to be able to gauge how much dark I need to add back in for everything to make sense. And I can see I have too much of my highlight color on the drips. So I'm going to go back in with my darker color and just kind of extend that down a little bit so there is less highlight. If you find this to be a little bit challenging, you could certainly leave it the way that it was. There wouldn't be anything wrong with it. I just felt like this made more sense. And then I'm always like a double and triple checker for like the dry fit of things. So that's what I'm doing here. I'm making sure that it matches up with the shadow and then I like the way that it's looking. And then we're going to go through and do the same thing to the other cake. So we're basically getting two chances here to kind of practice it. With the first one, which is a little bit bigger, so it's a little bit easier to color. Bigger items always are. We're going to, figure out what it is that we like and what it is we don't like. And then that way, when we go in to do the second one, we have a better idea of how it should go together right from the get-go. So here, this one, because it is just, slightly smaller, we do want to make sure that we're paying attention with how much dark we're putting down. We don't want it to be, overpowering. Like you don't want your dark to overpower it because your shadows help give dimension, but so do your highlights. So we need to make sure that we're still leaving a reserved area for that highlight. So it will give us the most dimension possible as we're putting together our die cuts. Die cuts are it's kind of like no line coloring because you don't have that bold black outline to follow. But it's not quite as challenging because you still have very defined edges. Whereas with a no line coloring, sometimes you can lose the edge and then you're left to your own devices to figure out how it should go. So I do find die cutting to be something that is just slightly more challenging to color than just a stamped black image. But I really, really think it's worth it because it allows you to create something that really looks three-dimensional because you have the addition of the extra layers. So now that both of those are done, if you're coloring on a glass mat like I am, you do want to make sure you go in and clean up any lines that are left on your glass mat because as you move on to your next colors, you run the risk that your marker will pick that up, and we don't want that. So for the flowers, I'm going to color them white. So just like the cake, we're going to use some gray markers. The only addition that we are going to add is a little bit of a Y00. If you don't have that marker, it's okay. You're just looking for a lighter yellow. And that is just to kind of change the tone of the center, just to add a little bit of yellow in there to, like, typically your flower centers or a yellow or yellow brown. Sometimes they can be black, but that's not as common. Here, don't worry about like the centers of your flowers, because we're actually going to use the gemstones to fill these in to add some sparkle. Right now, we're really just working on getting that shading. We are going to use the W5. We're just going to kind of bring it in after the fact, so that it creates what looks like a more, how do I want to word this? It looks like a more like deep-seated center, so that it sits down a little bit further than the rest of the flower, and that will again help with the dimension. So I'm just following the lines that are already there. These die cuts have those embossed lines or cut lines that are already in each of the petals. So I'm adding in some shading in between the petals, because you're going to have some darker edges there, which will help with the separation. And then just kind of doing a line like a little bit up the center where that cut line is already there. I know that I'm going to blend it out, a little bit more with the W1. And we do need all 4 of these flowers. So there you're going to see sometimes, like with the cherries, I think I colored 4 cherries, but I only ended up needing 3. At the time that I was doing the coloring, I wasn't entirely sure how many I was going to need. And I have learned from my crafty friends who do die cutting more often than I do, that it's always better to have more than have to go back and die cut them, which now after having done them, I can tell you that that is true. So we blend that out with the W1 and then just go in with that Y00 and kind of blend it out from the center. Just a little bit. We're not, we still want them to look white. We just want them to have that little bit of a yellow tinge kind of out from the center. And with strawberries, they do have like these little flowers on the vine, which are typically white, and that's how I chose the color. So here is that W5. This one we will not really be blending out. I'm going to put a little bit in the center, and then just again kind of on those little cut lines, I will do a couple of little flicks of color, just to help create a little bit more dimension and help it look like the center is more, it sits lower than the rest of the flowers. So that's all we're doing there. And then we will be moving on to doing the fruit that we're going to decorate our cakes with. For that, I chose to do the cherries and the strawberries, both the same shades of red. When you are creating a card and it has a kind of a lot of pieces going on, which here it doesn't have so much going on, but we do have a lot of decorations on this cake. It helps if you use the same colors repeated to create a more cohesive look so that the colors aren't competing. So for the cherries cut as 2, and one of them is tucked behind the other. So right away, I know the one that's behind, I'm going to add shading to. And then the one that's on top, I added a little bit of shading kind of where the cherry stem would be attached, where it kind of sinks in. And then along the bottom left, because remember when we colored the frosting, I colored my shadows as if they were to the bottom left. And so I want to carry that throughout the whole card so that it makes sense. So the next color that we use is the mid-tone, and then I have a dark mid-tone, which is R29, and a light mid-tone, which is R35. My highlight color is that R32, but just like the darkness, you're not going to see as much of it as you will the mid-tones. The mid-tones are really going to be what kind of carry your card. Those are going to be the 2 main colors that you'll see. So we've colored that one, and now we're going to color these 3 exactly the same way. You can, once you get more comfortable, you could do them a lighter red. You could do them a darker red. You could add a little bit of yellow in there. You know, there's some cherries that have like a little bit of yellow. And the same thing rings true for the strawberries. You know, you might have some areas that have a little bit of green or a little bit of yellow. And so doing the coloring where we're kind of customizing how the fruit looks, even though they're the same die cut, you could color them in several different ways so they do not look as if we are coloring the same thing over and over again. So that's just something to keep in mind when you're doing it. Once you get comfortable with how to lay your shadows down and stuff, don't be afraid to kind of mix up your colors and see. One thing that I didn't mention when we were coloring the first cherry is I do leave a white outline on both the left and right hand sides. Because of that, because the cherry that sits in the front should have a lighter edge when it's butted up against the other cherry, that's going to help it kind of stand out and them not to blend in together. So I do leave that white edge typically until I get out to my lightest mid-tone. And then I will fill that in just around the edge there. So that way it does stand out from the R59 we're using as our shadow color. So these are super fun ways to, you know, practice your coloring, especially since we're doing multiples in the same card. You know, the first one will be more difficult than the third one, will be more difficult than the fourth one. Like, you will get better and you will get more confident as you are going on and doing your coloring. With my lightest mid-tone, I am still leaving just a little bit of, you know, little triangles of color kind of where the cherry is the roundest. And that is where I'm going to go in with my highlight color. And this one, you know, you may have to go over once or twice. Lighter colors of alcohol markers remove a little bit of darkness from their previous colors. So if you go over it once or twice, it's going to help it blend a little bit better. The strawberries we're using the same reds for, but they have the little toppers on them. I'm not going to do what we did with the cake. Remember how we traced the edge? With this one, I just know, you know, strawberries are often kind of more heart-shaped. So where it would be plucked off of the vine, where the stem would connect, I'm already going to put in like a little triangle of darker color to help give them that more heart shape. And then for each one, I'm going to make them a little bit darker in various spots. And once again, that is just so that they look a little bit different. So this one, I added the, you know, the darkness more to the bottom. I kept the highlight on the two like roundest parts of the heart. But there, I know that there's some of them that I'm going to want to lay on their side. So I'm going to add a little bit more shadow, maybe to one full side of the strawberry. But each one is going to have, you know, a little bit of that darker color where it's attached to the stem. For the last two strawberries, I'm not going to use that R59 at all, because if you buy, you know, whether you buy them or you pick them yourself, when you look at a grouping of strawberries, they are not all the same color. You know, they tend to be a little bit darker when they're really ripe, like almost to the point of being overripe. And where if they're just barely ripe, you're going to have a lighter red color, or, you know, that yellowish green that we talked about. I'm not going to put any of the yellowish green in this one because I'm trying to keep it, I'm trying to keep it as educational, but still simple in case you are not as comfortable with coloring with your alcohol markers. But you can see the only dark that I put in this one is just where that little dip is, where they attach to the stem. And then there's going to be a lot more of that R32, a lot more of a highlight there to make the strawberry a little bit lighter. My red combination does tend to be a bit more on the blue side. You don't necessarily have to go more on the blue side. If you wanted to go more on the orange side, you could easily get away with an R 24, 27, 29. That would be a little bit more tomatoey orange, but I prefer one that is a bit more on the blue side. So that is why I picked the combination that I picked, but that certainly doesn't mean it's the only combination out there. So this one we definitely kept nice and light. We're going to leave that highlight kind of through the center there. And then don't forget in between your coloring, if you are working on a glass mat, to make sure you are cleaning up those areas. Also, from holding the die cuts with my fingertip, I have gotten a little bit of Copic marker on there. You want to make sure you're cleaning that off as well, so you're not transferring the color from your fingertip to the next die. Here, we're using the same greens again, just for that cohesive feel, but you could definitely mix it up. For the cherry stems, I am going to add my darkest color kind of right next to the stem along the leaf. And what that's going to do is it's going to push the leaf behind the stem. And then I added just a little bit of darkness at the edge of the stem. And I will just, again, follow that same, the same order that I have been doing, darkest to my dark midtone, light midtone, and then my lightest. For the leaf here, I think I just did the light midtone. I don't necessarily know that I did the lightest color, but I did use the lightest color on the stem. And once again, that is just to push the stem forward and the leaf behind. And we'll color them pretty close to the same way. Some of the leaves will have a little bit more darkness or a little bit more lightness, just to make them, you know, more interesting to look at, so it doesn't look like it was, you know, copy paste, all of the same type of, you know, coloring. So, but these are, once again, like I said earlier, they're just really great to practice on, because you're doing the same thing over and over again. And you're only going to get better with practicing. That's something I think all of us kind of struggle with, especially when we're in the beginning stages, is making that time to practice, because we want everything that we color to be a workable, complete piece to go on our project. And so we get frustrated when they don't come out exactly the way that we want them to. But just keep telling yourself, every one that you color is going to be that much closer to getting the desired result that you want. So I am a firm believer, and if you've watched my videos in the past, you know, I'm a firm believer that everything is fixable and we will work around it and find a way to make do. That is true of all of them. So if you're, you know, if you're more comfortable with colored pencils and you're struggling with markers, the same color theory applies no matter which medium you are using. So maybe try the colored pencils first, or try, you know, doing a flat wash of an alcohol marker and then going in and adding your layering colors with colored pencil. That's perfectly okay too. All of us are on different art journeys, and we're at different places in our journey. And, you know, just because something works for me and you're struggling with it doesn't mean that you shouldn't still have a piece that you're happy with, even if you have to do it a little bit differently. That's totally fine. For the tops of the strawberries, we're only using 3 colors. There's not a lot of real estate here, guys. They're a very tiny piece. You could honestly probably get away with 2 colors. I chose to do 3, so I'm using the darkest color to just almost like make like a little, I don't know, like a little asterisk, little star kind of thing. I'm just flicking out from the center to the stem and then to the 3 leaves for all of them, making sure that I'm hitting up those corners where they meet. And then I will go back in with my mid-tone and go, once again, go over all of my darkness and, you know, flick that just slightly past where the dark is. And then I'll fill the rest in with my lightest color. So that way I know that there is going to be a little bit of dimension. You know, these will look slightly darker than the leaves that we did for the cherries. Even though, most of them are the same colors, we have more darkness on this smaller little leaf than we do on the cherry leaves. So they will present just a little bit differently, but they will still look really nice together because they're still in the same color family. You absolutely could, use a couple of different greens, that were maybe close to each other, but different combinations. But I found it just to be easier and simpler to use the same green. So here is the leaves that I have cut out. Once again, they have that embossed cut detail. So I'm just using my mid-tone to outline those little details, the veins of the leaf. And then I will work through to my next mid-tone, going over the YG17 and then filling in, some of those smaller areas. For the bigger leaf, it's easier to use the lighter color because there is more room. If you are coloring your smaller leaf and you find that there is not as much room left behind to do your lightest color, then just skip it. It's totally fine. You can also decide which way you're going to add the dark or the light. There's some of these that I am going to flip upside down just so that I will have a different shape of the leaf, peeking out behind my flowers or my strawberries. So even though they don't necessarily like the veins aren't going in the same direction, I can still add them behind the leaves, and you can add them with the dark on the outside edge if you want, so that all the veins are going in the same direction, or you can adhere them with the veins going in different directions. Leaves grow all kind of crazy, and I don't think that's something that somebody is going to pick out when they're looking at your card to say, like, oh, your leaves aren't going in the same direction. Like, nobody's going to point that out in your card. So don't worry about that. It just helps, if it's not all light edges, it just helps kind of to break up the decorations and make them look, while still being cohesive, make them look just slightly more interesting is all. So, we're doing just the exact same thing. Like I said in the beginning, you will need, I think I'm coloring 8 here. Math is not my forte, guys. I'm a colorist, not a mathematician. But I can count to 10 at least. So I think I'm coloring 8 here, and we actually need 9 leaves. So I apologize for that. But hopefully, you pre-read the homeworks and you know that you need 9 leaves. And then they're just all colored, exactly the same way that we've been doing it. Sometimes they're just, flipped up. This, I believe, is the last thing that we need to add any color to. So if you have not already preheated your laminator, now is a good time to make sure that you've turned it on and that it is getting nice and ready, because we are using that birthday effortless shimmer paper, which does require foil. So here, now we're going to start kind of building what we need to. We're going to, put the pieces parts together. We're going to put the frosting on the cake. We're going to put the top, like the strawberry toppers on the strawberries, the cherry stems on the cherries. So that way, when we are working with the die cuts, we're only having to pick up, one complete piece instead of moving around the stems in separate from all the cherries. So I am using a liquid adhesive for this. I find that I prefer liquid adhesive because it gives me a little bit more wiggle room to really make sure that my die cuts are lined up where I want them to be. But obviously you can use your preferred adhesive, whatever works for you. Later on, I will be bringing in some dry adhesive just for the acetate, but for putting the things together, I do prefer liquid adhesive. And then, as I put things together, I'm kind of going to stack them up here. and see how I like all of the different things. So now you can see that we have all these other, kind of colored items, that our cake doesn't look quite as gray as it did before. It definitely is looking white like we want it to. If you do not have tweezers, I could not recommend getting them more. I used to be one of those people who was like, why do I need tweezers? Like, I'm never going to use them. It's totally fine. And then once I started using them, like somebody had sent them to me, and I started using them, I was like, oh, this is why everybody's using tweezers, because it's so much easier. It's just so much easier to put, especially like little tiny die cuts like this together. It's just so much nicer. So for the toppers, I am trying not to put them on all exactly the same way. I am still trying to put the stem portion of it up, but just kind of varying where the leaves fall onto the strawberry. I've said it, how many times? You guys are probably, we're half an hour into this. You guys are probably so sick of hearing it, to make it more interesting. But it's the truth. That is the reason behind why I do it. Just so that there is some diversity. It's not just that same, copy paste, same image. Because we don't want that. That's not going to look as nice as something that appears to be a bit more organic, So that's going to be it for the strawberries, and then we will move on to putting together the cherries. With the cherries, I found that I could really line up. We're just going to put a little bit, just a little dab of glue on each end of the stem, but I found that I could really kind of get them down into the I want to keep saying the pit, but that's not true. Like where they would normally connect, we have, put in that darker line of color. So inside that little like cavern that we created on each of the cherries, I could get the stems lined up so that they really genuinely did look like the stem was growing out of the cherry. And I didn't have any issues with that. The tip on my glue press is the fine tip. If you do not have something that has a fine tip, you may just want to try, putting a little dab of glue on one side and then maybe using your finger to get the other, because you don't need a ton of glue to adhere these, and you don't want it to be seeping out behind that all over your cherry. So once those are done, I did mess around with how I was going to arrange everything, and I spared you the arranging of things because it did take me a while to figure out what I was going to do. But once you have your arrangement figured out, and there's a lot that goes into it of trying to find balance and, that the items work well together. Once I figured it out, I had a leftover flower and a leftover cherry, which is fine. Here, this is like so slowed down so you can see where everything is kind of laid out, because from here, I'm just going to start adhering it. So, the way that I like to do it may be different than the way that you like to do it. I like to lay out all of my die cuts beforehand, and then I just kind of go in with the top piece, put a little bit of glue on there, press it down, and pick up the die cut behind it, which may be different than the way that you want to do it. That's totally fine. In this case, if you were looking to just adhere them as you go, you would want to do the cherries first because they are behind the strawberries. So you would adhere the cherries down and then put the strawberry right on top of that, and then we're gluing them both to the top of the cake. You can see with the arrangement, I have this one is obviously in the center at the top, but then there is some florals on the left-hand side, some strawberries on the left-hand side of the second layer. And then again, we have another arrangement slightly larger on the right-hand side. So it's going to create that bit of balance in the design. The part at the bottom, I knew that I was going to want to add something down there, but until I had the rest of the card built, it wasn't something that I could commit to. So I'm basically laying these out, gluing them down, the ones that I can, so that way when I'm picking up my cake is one complete piece. That just makes it easier to work with. Because as you can see, as I'm kind of like moving things around, it is very challenging to get the dies to stay where you want them, which is why I typically lay them out and then glue them all together. But the other thing that you could do that would be very helpful, I have multiple videos on this as well, is using the hinge method with the press and seal. And so basically you would lay your press and seal over your die cuts once you have them laid out, and then you would burnish your press and seal to your glass mat, and then that way you could use it as a hinge, just lifting it up, adding glue to anything you can see the back of, turning it, back down, adhering all those in place, and then lifting them up, doing the next set of dies. That is much easier to do. But why I didn't do that, honestly, I don't know. I think I was just kind of like in the zone. Here, my leaf was not in the spot that I wanted it to be. So before my glue was dry, I just kind of plucked it out of the, from behind the strawberry, and now I can go in and kind of re-glue it. Same thing with those leaves on the left-hand side, like they are not adhered. So when I go in, I'm actually going to put glue on the front side before I tuck it back behind my flower. So that way I know it's going to stick to the back of my flower. And we're just going to work our way through the rest of the cake. I don't know that I have ever had a cake that had, like, Black Forest cake has cherries in it. But I don't know that I've ever had a cake that had cherries and strawberries in it. Maybe that's something I need to try. I'm a baker by nature. So I'm sure I could probably come up with something. I've done like cobblers with like multiple berries, like strawberries, blackberries, blueberries, all of those things. But I don't think I've ever put cherries in them. Though cherry pie is my favorite pie. Do you guys have I bet you do. You have a favorite one. So if you have ever had a cake or a dessert that had both cherries and strawberries in it, I would like to know about that, because I would be curious as to how that tastes. So here, again, I'm just getting everything lined up, making sure that everything is sitting where I want it to sit. I do find the tweezers to be much easier to kind of move things around so that they are where I want them. And then I'm going to, since the cherries is the part that will sit on top, that's the part that I'm going to add some glue to try and pick up the die cuts behind them, so that way I can adhere them as one whole piece. And obviously this moved in a way that I did not like, so I need to scoot my strawberry a little bit closer. The press and seal method is substantially easier than this. Or like in this case, you guys aren't having to figure out where the flowers are going because you're seeing me do it. So just adhering them one by one would probably also be easier than what I'm doing here. Here, I felt like my cherry leaf was blocking quite a bit of my flower, so I wanted to tuck it behind the flower, which you can do. So that way you're, not that we like the leaf, of course we like the leaf, but we want to be able to see a little bit more of the flower. So with the other leaves that are tucking behind, we are just adding the glue there. This one, I don't trust that the leaf stayed where I wanted it to, so I'm going to go ahead and just move it out of the way. while I get these down in place, and then I will add glue to that leaf and kind of tuck it behind where I want it to go. Same thing with these leaves. I was like, nah, they don't look right. I'm just going to pull them out. So as long as you work quickly with liquid adhesive, you usually can, have a little bit of time to kind of like pick up the edges and get your little leaves tucked behind. If you wait a long time though, you're risking ripping them, which we obviously do not want to do. So here I found it to be easier to just go ahead and adhere my cake to the cake stand and then put my leaves behind it, so that way I would have something else for the leaves to stick to besides just behind the flower. I have that, that cake, I called it a cake plate, but that's not the cake stand. That's what it has. Work with me here. The cake stand will also, act as another surface that I can glue my leaves onto, and just makes it that much more stable. Like I said, the pieces parts that are off to the left, we are not going to, do anything with those until we get to the final building of the card. This is just to make most of the pieces one piece and be able to move them around as one piece. So that is our whole cake. We are going to set that aside along with our colored portions, and then we are going to move on to the laminator. So here I have chose the banner background, and the size of these are made so that you can cut them in half and you would have two A2 sized cards. I tried both gold and red, and I ended up liking the gold better, but you could do these in whatever color you prefer. I liked the gold. I felt like it was classier. So I'll just save the red for another project, but these, you do want the deco foil or foil that works with your laminator. You do not want hot foil. They do not work the same. So here I have my piece of gold foil. I'm going to lay that on top of my shimmer paper. In the carrier sheet, you do want to use a carrier sheet, and I'm going to trim it down so that I'm not wasting all of my gold foil. This doesn't have to be perfect, just enough so that the whole area is covered. So mine, I'm going to need to kind of turn on its side to make sure that I have enough. And then I do like to tuck my paper into the little crease, and then I feed it in with the crease side of the carrier sheet. Once it's ready, you do want to make sure that it is heated up enough to be able to have the foil adhere to the toner that's on the paper. So this does take, a second or two. If you find that you have not gotten results that you're happy with, you can try again. You would just use a new sheet of the gold foil to try again. I did not have a problem, but I've used this laminator for foiling lots in the past, so I knew that it would work for me. Alternatively, if you do not want to foil it, you could use the banner paper just by itself. Your background would just have black banners instead of gold. And considering the color scheme that we have going on for this card, black would be perfectly acceptable. I just like the added addition of the gold foil. It makes it feel fancier, but using black would also be totally fine because we have other elements of gold that we're bringing in, with the paper and the cake stand and things like that. So here I'm just going to remove this. You can see it foiled beautifully. I had no issues. And if you have a solid toner paper, you could use this as well to get the negative. So here I'm going to start trimming everything down. I'm going to trim my gold cardstock to be a full A2 size, which is 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. And then once I have that, because I am cheap and I like to save as much of my paper as possible, I'm actually going to cut this into a frame. So I'm going to line up on the right-hand side at a 1/2 inch. And then I'm going to take my little blade down to a 1/2 inch as well. And then I will cut it, stopping a 1/2 inch before the bottom. So this is how I'm going to be cutting all of my frames. I'm doing that with the gold paper, with black and with white at different measurements, and I will share those as we go along. However, this only works if you have this type of trimmer. If you do not have a trimmer like this with a wire guide, another way that you could create these is with rectangle, like nesting dies or infinity dies. You would be able to create the same frames. You would just use your rectangle dies to cut out 3 layers so that you would have those different frames. So this one, again, is 4 1/4 by 5 1/2, cut at a 1/2 inch. The black one is going to be 4 by 5 1/4, and the frame will be cut at 1/4 of an inch. So here, this was an A2 size. I'm just trimming it down to that 4 by 5 1/4. This assures that I will have gold around the edges of my card, which is what I want. And then I will line up the blade at 1/4 of an inch, and then I will cut down, stopping 1/4 of an inch below or before the edge of the paper. And I will do the same thing on all 4 sides. So finding that 1/4 of an inch, stopping at 1/4 of an inch before it ends. So that way my frame is nice. Again, the easier way to do this is with rectangle dies. And then that way you can, create the frames as you're going. They might not necessarily be the same exact size as mine, but that's okay. It's not a problem. If you are doing this like I am and you are having, maybe you missed one of the corners, you can always lay it back in, look for that wire guide to see that you're perfectly lined up, and then, drop your blade down so that you can get the corner. That's what I am doing here because it just wasn't cut all the way through. So then that leaves me with this rectangle that I can set aside and use for something else. Now, this is the white, and this one is going to be cut at, again, 4 by 5 1/2. But instead of doing the 1/4 inch, we're going back to the 1/2 inch. And this will allow my white to line up perfectly with my black, but still have an inside mat. So again, full piece of paper is 4 by 5 1/4, and then the blade is dropped at a 1/2 inch. So once again, this is just, I choose to do this because not everybody has dies. If if I was doing it with a class where dies were part of the kit, then I would have used those. But that's not the case, and I want to make sure that everybody has the opportunity to make the card. The other thing that we're going to trim out is for the Be Your Own Kind of Cupcake Effortless Artistry paper, we're going to get our sentiment. And that sentiment is down kind of bottom right, and it says "Have a sweet birthday." This one is a really good size for the frame size that we've chosen. But if for some reason you don't like this one, you could pick one that was a little bit smaller. I wouldn't go longer because then you'll mess with how the frame looks. But you could find one that was a little bit smaller and use that one as well. It's going to go on the bottom portion of our card. So I'm just going to, again, trim that out, making sure I'm, dropping my blade at a certain place where I'm not going to be cutting through any of the other images. And then once I have it out, I will be able to go in and just trim off that bottom portion and set it to the side. For the acetate that I have is a little bit of a larger piece, but I'm just going to adhere it and then I will trim it out. So you'll see that when we get there, but at this point you do want to have your acetate nearby. So here I am adhering this so that my banners go up and down instead of, like turned on their side. And the same thing with a piece of black cardstock. I am going to add that to the bottom. I'm not doing any math for these because I don't need to. And if I don't need to do math, I'm not gonna. So here, basically, I'm just going to adhere them down to my white card base. And then once I know that they are adhered firmly, I can flip them over and then just use my scissors to trim along the edge, so that way everything is perfectly colored in the back. The reason for the black at the bottom is to give us some ground, so our cake doesn't look like it's just floating in midair. It looks like it has a surface that it is seated upon. So once we get those trimmed off, then we're going to kind of start building up our frame layers. This one, I should mention, the banner one does not go all the way to the top. That doesn't matter to us because we're going to have these frames that go around it. But just so you are aware, there's like a 1/4 of an inch at the top that is not the shimmer foiled paper. This is where that dry adhesive comes in. I just have some like rip and tear tape, score tape, whatever you want to call it, that I'm just able to rip off. And the reason that I'm choosing to put that on the back of the gold paper is because I find that this does adhere better to the acetate. If you can use liquid glue, but then you do have to make sure that you give it plenty of time to dry. Otherwise, your acetate's just going to be sliding all over, smearing that liquid glue, and we don't want that. If you wanted to turn this into a shaker card, this would be a really easy one to do that with. You would just, you would add the foam tape much thicker. Maybe I should talk about that once we get there. So here we're going to remove the backer for our adhesive, and then we'll line up our acetate. And once again, I'm just going to trim off any excess so that way everything is that same A2 size and I didn't have to do any fancy measuring. So once I have pulled off the release paper, I will go ahead and line that up on my acetate, and then just trim it off like normal. As far as turning it into like an interactive card, so I mentioned that you could turn it into a shaker, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But inside your kit, you also have those easy lights from Pear Blossom Press. And this is something that you could very easily turn into like a lighted cake display, because that really was my intention when I was looking at it, was like, oh, wouldn't this be like a cute little window display for like a bakery? And so that's why I put the acetate in there, so it looked like you were looking through a window. But you absolutely could hide the light system in there, and do like the 3 lights at the top, and then you would have a little button to press it to turn it on, and your window display would light up, which I think would be really super fun. Same thing with the shaker. You could do the little shaker bits. Here we're lining up I'm doing the white first because it is wider than the black. Even though they're the same size, we cut this one at a 1/2 inch and this one at a 1/4 of an inch. So the black will actually be the tallest layer. It's going to sit on top of that white and give us, the look of the 3 mats. But really it's more of like kind of a framed look. I just thought that was kind of a nice way to polish off their like little window decor, if you will, because I have worked, I don't know if any of you guys have, but I've worked a lot of retail and staged window displays and mannequins and all of that stuff. So usually there is, a little bit of a backdrop. There's, the item that you want to showcase, some things kind of down at the bottom. A lot of times for me, it was like clothing stores. So it would be like sunglasses and accessories and purses and things like that you would see with the outfit. So now that this is done, if you wanted to turn it into a shaker, when you did the foam tape, instead of doing either 1 layer of foam tape with a thinner foam tape, you would do 2 layers, or like Pear Blossom Press has one that is 2 layers thick already, so it's thick enough to allow for their light mechanics. You could use one of those like extra thick ones, just 1 layer. The sentiment I'm adhering down at the bottom. This is going to make our bottom border just slightly thicker, but not so much so that I think it's problematic. So here is the thing. Before you add the acetate framed piece, you have to view it as kind of like the lid. So whatever you want to do to the card before you put the lid on it, because once you put the lid on it, there is no going back. You will not be able to remove the lid. It will be sealed in there. So I'm going to go ahead and glue down my cake. I double checked it. I told you I'm a big fan of the dry fit. So I double checked it with the frame to make sure it is in a spot where we're going to be able to see it in all of its glory. And then I just held it in place, added some glue. I will then flip it upside down to make sure that I can get glue under the other portion. Here, because we have these cut lines in the cake, I did notice that some of my garnishes, some of my decorations were kind of sliding in underneath the cut line. So in order to fix that, I just took this is like a die poker tool. You could use anything that was kind of small and thin. I just went in there with that to make sure that I pulled out the decor items so that they were sitting on the top of the cake and they weren't tucked into the cake, because that would not look right. So after that, I added my glue, pushed that down, made sure it was adhered to my background. If you did not want to do the frame, you don't want it to look like a display, that's fine. This card would be perfectly balanced and fine without the addition of the frame. The reason the frame is there is because I specifically had that idea of wanting it to be like a display case. But the card, the way that it is, without the quote-unquote lid, the frames on it with the acetate, is also a perfectly great card. So whichever way you want to do it. I like to share with you guys and give you, lots of different options, because not everybody likes the same kind of things. So for the foam tape, I did end up having to, mine's a little wider. It's not necessarily as thick, but it is a little wider. So I did have to trim mine in half, and then I am just putting that around those frame pieces. Again, if I was going to make this a shaker, I would do another layer of this foam tape to make sure that I had enough room for my shaker bits. But since I am not doing it as a shaker, one layer is going to be just fine. So I will get that all on there and lined up, and then I'm going to set it aside while I figure out what I'm doing in the bottom section. So here I decided I was going to do one of the blossoms and a little cherry on the left-hand side. I'm going to be honest with you guys, you cannot see a lot of the cherry by the time that the frame goes on. However, you can see just the kind of the top of it and the stem, which adds to the idea that this is a display case with all of these things kind of displayed at the bottom as well. So I still feel like it's worth putting in, because otherwise you have nothing that has any height at the bottom and it looks very kind of blank. So I put the flower with the two leaves and the cherry on the left-hand side. On the right-hand side, I put the strawberry and another blossom kind of more higher, so that way you would see more of it and it would look like it was set further behind the cake stand. Because anytime we're putting something together, like a little mini scene like this, anything that's closer to the front of the card, like the edge of the card, is going to look like it's up front. Anything that is closer to the top of the card, or in this case, kind of like the top of the ground, is going to look farther away. So this one will look as if it is behind the cake stand, while the other one is very clearly in front of the cake stand. I hope that makes sense. So this leaf got away from me. that little guy totally got away from me. So I picked him up with my tweezers. I cleaned up the glue to the best of my ability. This is why we have those adhesive erasers, right? So I was able to clean mine up pretty easily and not have any issues. But if that happens to you, adhesive erasers will be your best friend. It's going to pick up any of the, leftover residue that maybe like dirt or other things would catch on. I was able to re-adhere my lost little leaf back to the back of my flower, and now I can adhere that all down at the same time. Once again, this is before the frame goes on. You certainly could leave it like this and, just put the sentiment somewhere else. But I just like it as a display. I don't know, because I'm a scene person, I guess. So here's our gemstones. I am looking specifically for the same size gemstone for all of my flowers. Remember, I told you earlier we were going to be using those as the center of the flowers. So I like to dump mine into the lid so that way I can kind of use my tweezers to pick through them to make sure I can find all of the same sizes. In addition to that, I did add some other gemstones kind of around the cake. There isn't a right or a wrong way to add gemstones. I typically do try to add them in odd numbers because your brain tries to pair them if it's even numbers. So I do try to make sure that I use odd numbers. Sometimes this works out, sometimes it doesn't. I didn't really count the ones that were in the flowers because they're not like the part of the background decor. So they're just the centers of the flower. So I didn't count them towards my odd or my even, to be quite honest. But I just put a little bit of glue in the center and then dropped the rhinestone in. I think these are really great rhinestones because they are like the more color changing ones. So depending upon the light, they change the color. And again, I think that adds lots of interest. I think that they're fun. I really like those ones that are like iridescent or holographic, like the ones that all look like a bunch of different colors. I am here for those. I am here for those. I didn't add really any other shimmer because we already have like the gold foil in the background, the gold foil in the frame. Like there is a bunch of other shiny things going on. However, if you are a person who loves the shine, you certainly can add as much as you would like. I'm just kind of laying my gemstones out here to make sure that I'm going to be happy with where they're going. This, I'm going to be honest, is like one of the hardest things for me because typically in a video for myself, like this whole part, I would edit out because I feel like it takes me so long to find gemstones. But since we are crafting along with one another, I am hopeful that it is taking you guys just as long to find your gemstones as it is me. Because I don't like, even when I was like going through, I was like, oh my gosh, just cut it. Just cut it, Kelly, just cut it. And I didn't. I was tried to stay the course of what we are doing here together, working alongside each other. But it was a struggle for this girl. So for the gems, I did put some in a little bit of that open area that's in between the flower and the strawberry behind the cake stand. I also put one or two next to the flower and the cherry on the left-hand side. Some of these, I'm going to be honest with you, because I was looking at the picture as a whole without the frame. Some of these gemstones that I put on, by the end of the day, you can't even see them. Like you can't even see any of them, especially the ones that are like down in the bottom, like to the left of the cherry and the little flower. I think you can only see one of those. The one I'm doing right here that's left to the cake, you can only see one of those and not two. So I would not stress too much about the addition of the gems. Even some of us who kind of do this for a living still struggle with how to put gems on a card. So the only real advice I have for you is add as much as you like that makes your heart happy. Try to work in odd numbers. And use them where needed to kind of fill in any empty space that you have. It helps kind of bring the whole design together. So that's all I've got for the gemstones. We're almost done here. We only have just a few minutes left. So, if there's any questions that you have or that you didn't get to ask, by all means, please let me know what they are. My favorite part is being able to interact with you guys and answer any questions that you have. So please don't be shy in the comments. Ask whatever questions that you need, and I will try my best to address every one of them. So here we have all of the shimmer on. Now I'm, again, dry fitting the frames so that you can, frame out the cake and make sure everything is good where it needs to be, that I don't have any gems where I need my foam tape to sit, any of those things. And I'm going to go ahead and remove my foam tape. Now, if you are concerned, because foam tape obviously can be very sticky, so if you are concerned about being able to put it down and get it straight and lined up in one shot, I would highly recommend doing what I do, which is adding some liquid adhesive to your foam tape. This gives you just that extra 60 seconds of wiggle room that we kind of all need to make sure everything gets lined up properly. And if you can get it in one shot, that's great. But if you don't get it in one shot, then you don't have to. I find to line things like this up, I have much better luck if I stand up and look down at it to make sure everything is lined up appropriately. That's just what works for me. Is just, like an aerial view. So once I have it lined up, then I can go ahead and adhere down the foam tape, give it really good pressure, make sure everything is where I need it to be. And then that's it for us, guys. That's our little display cake colored die cut card. I hope that you learned lots. I hope you enjoyed making the card. Thank you so much for spending your time with me. I know time is precious and I always appreciate it. I hope you enjoyed the class. And again, any comments that you have, please feel free to comment your questions and I will try to the best of my ability to answer them. I hope that you guys enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you so much for joining me, and I will see you later. Bye.
Hi everybody, Lori here. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm excited to be a part of the Meraki Cardmaker Connect virtual card making retreat. And I have a couple of projects to share with you using products from that retreat bundle. I'm going to be starting with the Party Balloons A2 die. And this is a really fun kind of cover die. It's 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inches. You can do a lot of different techniques with it to get a lot of different looks. And then for the sentiment, I'm using the Celebrate Word die. Again, this has the word and the shadow backer. So to begin, I'm die cutting the Party Balloons A2 die into some white cardstock. I'm using hammer mill. It's not too thick, it's not too thin. Any white cardstock will do for this because I'm not going to be ink blending or stamping. It's just all die cutting. And I am using my Anna Griffin Impress die cutting machine off camera, so I don't show the actual die cutting process because pretty sure you know how that works. And then I'm going to flip that die over, and what I decided to do was die cut each one of the balloons in a different shade of solid color cardstock. So this is going to be a bit of a like an inlay die cutting technique, and there is a lot of balloons, so there's going to be a lot of scraps of solid color cardstock. Most of this cardstock is by Concord 9th. I love their colors. You don't need very much. Some of the balloons are just little teeny slivers, but I am going, and you know this is no surprise, in rainbow order. I just love rainbow balloons. What can I say? You don't have to do rainbow. You could do just 3 colors. You could keep it very simple. You don't have to cut little squares for each balloon. You could also back this die cut, the white die cut, with acetate and make it a shaker panel. You could ink blend behind. You could also do pattern paper behind. So many different looks you can get from one die. I'm actually going to be adding later on, after I get all the balloons die cut, I'll do a little bit of ink blending along the base of the balloons to give them just a little bit of gradient, little gradient love. And then now I'm popping out the balloons as I go and kind of placing them in where they need to fit, like a puzzle. And this helps me to kind of see what I've done, what I need to do, what colors I want. If you want to go in rainbow order, and I know I make things difficult, but you kind of got to think, okay, what color needs to go here? And then you can't do all the balloons at once. You got to skip around. So you do got to think, okay, then green needs to go here and purple here. And I actually changed my mind a couple times. I'll die cut something in purple and decide, I don't like that shade there. So I changed my mind. It's an evolution, and that's okay. Again, you don't have to make this so intricate. You could do them all out of just a couple different shades. But you know me, I like to get in as much color as I possibly can. So this does take a few passes through the die cutting machine, but it really not that. I kind of like this kind of stuff. To some, it might be tedious, but to me, I get in the zone. I love all the color. It really makes me happy. And another thing I love about this Concord 9th cardstock is it's not too thick, so it die cuts easily. Some of these balloons, like this one here, this little balloon is actually 2 little pieces because the balloon string is going right down through it. So in my experience, I have better results when I'm doing a lot of die cutting to use solid color cardstock that's not too extremely thick. Okay, I changed my mind. I'm changing my mind. Don't mind me. I just kind of, this is what I do. Just 2 steps forward, 1 step back until I like how it's going. Now, once I get all the colors how I like them, I'm going to take them back out and ink blend. And again, you do not have to do this step, but I love the little bit of gradient love that it gets. It kind of gives these balloons a bit of dimension. Since this is a fairly flat card, adding that little bit of ink blending does add a little something, a little va-va-va-voom. And so I am, for the most part, this is honeysuckle cardstock, and I'm blending honeysuckle ink on it. And then I'll take that brush, just what was ever left over, and blend on that light pink. So here we have sorbet cardstock, and I'm blending sorbet ink on it. You do not have to match your ink to your cardstock. And I do that a lot. Like if I have orange cardstock, I'll just grab an orange ink and an orange brush and blend away. But since I have the matching, I'm going to try to use it. Now this is I think this is a lemongrass cardstock, but I'm blending parsley on it. So sometimes you might need to use a darker shade to get that intensity that you desire. Okay, so this balloon here is the one that was kind of split in two. So you got to blend that little sliver there down along the bottom. Now, I'm not showing every single balloon. You get the idea. I'm just adding a little gradient love down on the bottom. I'm excited to see all the videos in this virtual card making retreat because we all kind of using the same little retreat bundle, but all the cards look very, very different. And this is a great way to see how you can get more mileage out of these products. Get a lot of different looks. And that's a fun thing about having a bunch of designers use the same products. You get a lot of ideas. Okay, so I have a white card base here, cut to 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inches. Now my card base is thicker. For my card bases, I usually use Nina Solar White 110 pound. It's nice and thick and sturdy. But when I'm doing panels and such, I use Hammermill. I'm putting a little bit of Bearly Arts glue on the back, just a little dot. It's kind of an intricate die, and then gluing this straight flat down onto the card base. And then I'm going to inlay all the little blended die cut balloon pieces. And if you're anything like me, you probably forgot, where did all those balloons go? What I should have done when I had them all inlaid, I should have put that press and seal over all of them, and then you could flip the press and seal over and glue this whole shebang in one shebang. Glue the whole shebang in one shebang. But I didn't think ahead. I don't always think ahead, but I do love this inlay technique because it gives you lots of color, lots of pow, but not a ton of bulk. And I've been kind of digging that lately. For many years, I was popping up dimension like till the cows come home. But when I started to actually mail the cards, it became a bit of a burden. And so now I'm trying to still get that color, still get that pop, still get the wow factor, but try to just kind of rein in, just a little bit, not all together, but rein in the bulk, just a smidge. Because if you actually do want to send the cards, you know, it is nice if they're not like 5 layers thick of foam tape. Anywho, unless you're going to hand deliver it. Now that's a different story. But here's all the balloons. Look how pretty they look with that ink blending. Now for the sentiment, I'm using the Celebrate Word die. I'm doing the shadow backer out of vellum, the word die out of metallic gold cardstock. And now the thing about this one here is every one of those words is its own separate die. It's not connected. So you're going to have to glue each letter down individually. Just keep that in mind. And that's the nice thing about having the shadow backer. You've got the vellum to put it on. Another thing you could do is die cut the shadow backer and then die cut the word into the shadow backer. Do you feel me? So there's probably some projects that did that technique. Like if you die cut the shadow backer out of black, then die cut the word into that black, you could lay that over white and it'll give you a white sentiment. I'm not sure if I'm making sense, but it's just another way to do this word die. I love a good metallic gold on vellum. I like the vellum because you can see through it and doesn't, you know, cover up the beautiful balloons. I'm adding some starshine sequins here and there. These are by Simon Says Stamp, and this card is finished. It's got the color, it's got the gradient love, it's got the bling and the metallic gold, but it's not too bulky if you do want to mail it. Okay, one more card just for fun because I wanted to try out the Festive Delight layering cake die. Now this one, again, it's all heavy on the die cutting. I'm just die cutting every piece in the die set with solid color cardstock. Again, using mostly Concord 9th, but you're essentially building a layered cake. You have the cake stand, you have all the different layers of cake with the frosting, and then there's several different toppings or kind of accessories that you can put on the cake. Flowers, cherries, and whatnot. I think there's a heart, maybe a candle, can't remember, but you can get a lot of different looks. It doesn't have to necessarily be birthday. It could be anniversary or any type of celebratory occasion. I mean, I'm down for eating cake any old time of the day. Okay, so take this off camera, run it through my die cutting machine, and then basically you're just assembling. I didn't add any gradient to these die cuts, although you could. To top my cake off, I'm going to do just a little bit of cherries. They look like maraschino cherries, which I personally love. And then for the cake, I did a very, very light kind of, what is that, like nectar cardstock with a pink frosting. And here you have the little stems for the cherries. And for the cake stand, I have like a very light aqua. So I'm gluing on the frosting onto the cake. And here's where you could really customize if you want to do like chocolate frosting or do a bunch of different colors, like colored frosting. You could use pattern paper here. And again, you don't have to use the layer, like you don't have to make it a 2-tier cake. You could just do one small cake or one big, or you could layer up 3. You know, you can customize your cake. And then I put a little bit of glue on the bottom and adhere this to the cake stand. I actually have a cake stand that looks a lot like this. It's an old one by Martha Stewart. I'm a huge fan of Martha Stewart. I used to watch all her cooking videos, and probably a gift from my mom. Pretty much everything in my kitchen is a gift from my mom, as well as my cookbooks. It's all from her. And then I'm just gluing on the little cherry stems right on the top. And I have a panel of cream cardstock that I trimmed down a little bit smaller, popped it up on a white card base. I do have a little bit of foam tape on the back of the cake and the stand, the cherries and everything. Popping this up, so this card is slightly more dimensional. Now for the sentiment, I decided to use the Be Your Own Kind of Cupcake Effortless Artistry paper. So this paper has all these already colored cupcakes and sentiments. And then there's a die set where you could cut them out. So you're essentially creating your own kind of ephemera. But I decided to use the pre-printed sentiments for a sentiment on my card. So I'm carefully kind of trimming this out into a little sentiment strip using my mini guillotine trimmer. And this is only going to say, with love. I do trim it to a very small sentiment strip, put some foam tape behind it, pop it up right in the middle of the cake. So I love how this says with love because it can be used for a lot of different occasions. You know, maybe a wedding, anniversary. Maybe you just want to give it to your honey on Valentine's Day. And I added a few more of those starshine sequins for a little bling. And this card is finished. It's very, very simple, but I love those cherries on top. A great idea to use the Effortless Artistry paper for a sentiment. Make sure and check out the rest of the virtual card making retreat with Crafty Meraki. Thank you so much for joining me today. Have a wonderful day, and I will see you next time.